A millionaire visits his wife's grave every week. One day he finds a little girl digging the grave with a toy shovel. She says the woman isn't dead, and she has proof. The truth he discovers changes everything. For 2 years, every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock sharp, Richard Thornton drove through the wrought iron gates of Evergreen Cemetery in Portland, Oregon. The routine never changed. He parked his black sedan in the same spot beneath the old oak tree, walked the same stone path lined with rose bushes, and stopped at the same marble headstone that bore his wife's name, Eleanor Marie Thornton, beloved wife and truth-seeker. The Pacific Northwest rain fell softly that October morning as Richard knelt before the grave, his expensive suit growing damp. He no longer cried the way he had in those first terrible months. Now the grief sat inside him like a stone, heavy and cold, weighing down every breath. His business partner, Marcus Webb, had told him countless times to move forward, to let go, to remember Eleanor without dwelling in the pain. But Richard couldn't imagine a future without her brilliant smile, her fierce intelligence, her unwavering sense of justice. He was lost in memories when he heard the scraping sound. Richard looked up and froze. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, stood at the foot of Eleanor's grave. She wore a faded pink jacket, too thin for the weather, and clutched a small toy shovel in her dirt-stained hands. She was digging. Horror shot through Richard's chest. He scrambled to his feet, his voice coming out sharper than intended. "What are you doing? Stop that right now." The girl didn't flinch. She looked up at him with dark, knowing eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "This isn't real," she said simply. "The grave. It's empty. She's not here." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "What did you say?" "The lady you come to see every week. Eleanor Thornton. She's not buried here. This is fake." The girl spoke with an unsettling certainty, each word deliberate and clear. "That's impossible. You're just a child. You don't understand what you're saying." Richard's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, ready to call security, but something in the girl's steady gaze made him pause. "I'm 7, but I'm not stupid," she replied. "My mama helped her, your wife. She was hurt really bad, bleeding and scared. Mama found her and hid her. That was almost 3 years ago, right after they said she was gone." Richard's world tilted. 3 years. That was exactly when Eleanor had supposedly passed in that terrible car accident on Highway 26. The funeral had been closed casket. He'd never seen her body. Marcus had handled all the arrangements, insisting Richard was too distraught to deal with the painful details. "Who are you?" Richard whispered. "My name is Sophie Chen. My mama runs a place where people go when they can't go to hospitals, when they're running from bad things." The girl wiped her dirty hands on her jacket. "I'll come back tomorrow. Same time. I have proof." Before Richard could respond, Sophie turned and ran through the headstones, disappearing into the morning mist like a ghost. Richard didn't sleep that night. He sat in his downtown penthouse office, staring out at the Portland skyline, trying to make sense of what had happened. Every logical part of his brain screamed that the girl was confused, that grief had made him susceptible to cruel coincidences. But another part of him, the part that had fallen in love with Eleanor's investigative brilliance, couldn't ignore the details. How would a 7-year-old know about Eleanor's supposed accident? Why would she lie? The next morning, Richard arrived at the cemetery an hour early. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and grey. He waited, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Sophie appeared right at 8 o'clock, walking purposefully up the path. This time she carried a plastic folder. Without preamble, she opened it and handed Richard a photograph. His breath caught in his throat. The image showed Eleanor, thinner than he remembered, her face bruised and her clothes torn but unmistakably alive. She was sitting on a simple cot in what looked like a basement or bunker. Next to her stood an Asian woman in her 30s with kind eyes and medical gloves. "That's my mama, Dr. Lisa Chen," Sophie said quietly. "She took that picture 6 months ago. She wanted proof in case something happened to her." "In case what happened?" Richard's voice cracked. "Mama disappeared 2 weeks ago. The same people who hurt your wife, they took her." Sophie's young face remained composed, but Richard could see the fear beneath. "I need your help to find her, and you need to know the truth about what happened to Eleanor." Richard sank onto a nearby bench, his mind reeling. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." Sophie sat beside him, her small legs dangling above the ground. "Mama worked for a long time helping people who couldn't go to regular hospitals, people who were in danger. One night, almost 3 years ago, someone brought Eleanor to her. She'd been hurt in what they made everyone think was an accident, but it wasn't. People wanted her to stop looking into things she'd discovered, bad things about money and corruption." "What things?" Richard leaned forward intently. "Mama didn't tell me everything. She said I was too young, but I heard her on the phone sometimes. Something about fake companies and stolen money. Eleanor had found documents that proved important people were stealing from the government. When she got too close to the truth, they tried to make her disappear." Richard's hands clenched into fists. Eleanor had been an investigative journalist before they married. She'd left that career to work as a financial analyst for his company, Thornton Industries, but she'd never lost her instinct for uncovering the truth. In the months before her supposed accident, she'd been acting strangely, working late, making mysterious phone calls. When he'd asked her about it, she'd kissed his cheek and promised to tell him everything soon. He'd thought she was planning a surprise for their anniversary. Instead, she'd apparently stumbled onto something so dangerous that someone had staged her elimination. "Why didn't your mother come forward?" Richard asked. "Why keep Eleanor hidden?" "Because they were still looking for her. Mama said Eleanor had to pretend she was worse off than she really was, so they'd think she couldn't hurt them anymore. Eleanor stayed with us for months, recovering. Then one day she left. Mama said Eleanor had to finish what she started, that she couldn't hide forever while bad people kept hurting others." "Where did she go?" Sophie shrugged. "Mama wouldn't tell me. She said it was safer if I didn't know. But a few weeks ago, Mama got scared. She started packing boxes, making plans to move us somewhere far away. Then she vanished. I came home from school and she was just gone." Richard's mind raced. "You've been alone for 2 weeks. Where have you been staying?" "With a neighbor. She thinks Mama is on a work trip." Sophie looked down at her hands. "I couldn't tell anyone the truth. What if the bad people found out? But then I remembered Mama talking about you, about how you came to the cemetery every week. She said you were a good man, that Eleanor loved you so much it broke her heart to let you think she was gone. Mama said, if anything happened to her, I should find you." Richard pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my private investigator. We're going to find your mother and get to the bottom of this." "Wait." Sophie grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Mama said we have to be careful who we trust. She said someone close to you might be involved, someone you think is your friend." A chill ran down Richard's spine. Marcus, his business partner of 15 years, the man who'd consoled him through his darkest hours, the man who'd handled all the funeral arrangements, the man who'd repeatedly urged him to stop dwelling on Eleanor's absence and move on with his life. "Tell me more about what your mother knew," Richard said slowly. "Did she mention any names?" Sophie reached into her folder again and pulled out a piece of paper covered in her mother's handwriting. "These are initials. Mama said they belonged to important people involved in what Eleanor was investigating. She was going to give this to the police, but then she disappeared." Richard scanned the list. His blood turned to ice when he saw them. M.W. Marcus Webb. The initials appeared multiple times, always connected to offshore accounts and shell companies. "Sophie," Richard said carefully, "I need you to stay somewhere safe while I look into this. Do you have family, anyone you trust?" The girl shook her head. "Mama and I only had each other. She came to America from China to study medicine, and my father left before I was born." Richard made a decision. "Then you'll come with me. I have a secure property outside the city where no one will think to look. We'll work together to find your mother and Eleanor." As they walked to his car, Richard felt something shifting inside him. The grief that had paralyzed him for 2 years was transforming into something else. Rage, determination, purpose. That evening, Richard sat in his private study with Sophie sleeping in the guest room upstairs. He'd told his housekeeper to take the week off, and activated the property's security systems. Now he spread out the documents Sophie's mother had compiled, cross-referencing them with his company's financial records. The deeper he dug, the sicker he felt. Marcus hadn't just been involved in the corruption Eleanor uncovered. He'd used Richard's own company, Thornton Industries, as a vehicle for the schemes. Millions of dollars had been funneled through fake contracts and phantom suppliers. Public funds meant for infrastructure and education had vanished into offshore accounts. And Eleanor, working as the company's financial analyst, had discovered it all. Richard's phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Richard, where are you? You missed the board meeting today." Marcus's voice carried concern with an edge of irritation. "I'm worried about you, my friend. You've been even more withdrawn than usual this week." "Just needed some time alone," Richard replied carefully. "I'll be back in the office tomorrow." "Good, we need to discuss the new government contracts. There's some paperwork that requires your signature." A pause. "You sound different. Is everything all right?" Richard thought about Eleanor, alive somewhere and fighting. He thought about little Sophie, alone and afraid. He thought about Dr. Lisa Chen, disappeared because she'd helped the wrong person. "Everything's fine, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow." As Richard ended the call, he noticed something he'd missed before in the financial documents. Several payments had been made to a company called Pacific Security Solutions. He ran a quick search and felt his stomach drop. Pacific Security Solutions provided private protection and, according to several news articles, had been investigated for operating outside legal boundaries. The pieces were falling into place. Marcus had discovered Eleanor's investigation. He'd hired people to stage her accident and make her disappear. When Dr. Chen had saved Eleanor's life and hidden her, she'd become a liability too. Marcus had been playing the concerned friend while orchestrating everything from the shadows, all while keeping Richard grief-stricken and distracted. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark Oregon forest surrounding his property. Somewhere out there, Eleanor was still fighting. Somewhere Dr. Chen was in danger, and somewhere Marcus Webb believed he'd gotten away with it all. Not anymore. Richard picked up his phone and called, the one person he knew he could trust, an old college friend who now worked in federal law enforcement. It was time to bring this conspiracy into the light, but first, he needed to find Eleanor and save Dr. Chen before it was too late. Richard spent 3 days methodically building his case with his federal contact, Agent Sarah Morrison. She arrived at his property with a small team of trusted investigators, and together they pieced together the full scope of Marcus Webb's operation. The corruption ran deeper than Richard had imagined, involving multiple government officials, contractors, and corporate executives across the Pacific Northwest. But they still hadn't found Eleanor or Dr. Chen. Sophie had been remarkably brave throughout the ordeal, providing every detail she could remember about her mother's work and the people who'd come and gone from their small clinic. Richard found himself drawn to the girl's resilience. She reminded him of Eleanor in her quiet strength and sharp intelligence. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Richard woke to find Sophie's bedroom empty. Her bed was made, her few belongings still in place, but the girl was gone. Panic seized him as he searched the house, calling her name. Then he saw it. A note on the kitchen table in handwriting that wasn't Sophie's. "If you want to see the girl again, come alone to the old Morrison warehouse on Harbor Street at midnight tonight. Bring no one. Tell no one. We'll discuss terms for her return, and for your continued silence about matters that don't concern you." Richard's hands shook as he called Agent Morrison. They had security cameras around the property. How had someone gotten in? The answer came when they reviewed the footage. 2 men in utility company uniforms had approached the house at dawn. Sophie, early riser that she was, had answered the door. The men had grabbed her before she could scream. "We can't let you go alone," Morrison insisted as they gathered in Richard's study. "This is clearly a trap." "I know," Richard replied, "but we're going to turn their trap against them. I'll wear a wire. Position your team around the warehouse. This might be our chance to find both Sophie and Dr. Chen." That evening, as Richard prepared for the meeting, he received an unexpected call from an unknown number. He answered, his heart pounding. "Richard." The voice was female, familiar and impossible. It's me. Richard's legs nearly gave out. Eleanor. I don't have much time. They took Sophie to get to you, but it's really me they want. I've been working undercover in Marcus's organization for months, gathering evidence. I'm so close to having everything we need to bring them all down, but they've figured out someone's been leaking information. They're consolidating, getting rid of loose ends. Her voice cracked with emotion. I'm so sorry for what I put you through. Every day I wanted to contact you to tell you I was alive, but it was too dangerous. Where are you? Richard demanded. Where's Dr. Chen? Lisa is alive. They're holding her at the same location where they have Sophie, the warehouse on Harbor Street. It's a setup, Richard. Marcus knows about your federal investigation. He's planning to eliminate all the witnesses tonight and frame you for everything. You can't go there. I'm not leaving Sophie and Dr. Chen with those people. I know. Eleanor's voice softened. That's why I'm telling you. Agent Morrison is already planning a raid, isn't she? Good. But you need to know Marcus will have at least a dozen armed men there. He's desperate. When desperate men feel cornered, they become unpredictable and violent. Then how do we save them? I'll be there too. I've embedded myself deep enough that Marcus trusts me with his operations. Tonight, I'm supposed to help coordinate the warehouse meeting. I can get Lisa and Sophie out before things escalate, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Richard closed his eyes, hearing his wife's voice for the first time in 3 years. Always. The line went dead. At midnight, Richard drove his car slowly down Harbor Street. The industrial area was dark and silent, warehouses looming like sleeping giants on either side. His heart hammered against his ribs as he parked outside the Morrison warehouse, a decrepit building that had been abandoned for years. He could feel the wire taped to his chest and knew Agent Morrison's team was positioned around the perimeter, but he also knew Eleanor was inside somewhere, working her own plan in the shadows. The warehouse door creaked open as Richard approached. Inside, industrial lights illuminated a vast empty space. Marcus Webb stood in the center, flanked by several large men in dark clothing, and there, tied to a chair, with tears streaming down her face, was Sophie. Richard, my old friend. Marcus smiled, but his eyes were cold. Thank you for coming alone as instructed. Let the girl go, Marcus. This is between you and me. Is it? Marcus walked in a slow circle around Sophie's chair. You've been quite busy this week, meeting with federal agents, digging through financial records. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I know everything, Richard said steadily. The fake companies, the embezzlement, the government contracts, how you used my company to funnel millions of dollars into your accounts, how you tried to silence Eleanor when she discovered it all. Marcus's expression hardened. Eleanor was always too curious for her own good. She couldn't just accept her comfortable life and let things be. She had to dig and investigate and threaten everything I'd built. Everything you stole, you mean? I earned every penny. Marcus's composure cracked. For 15 years, I stood in your shadow while you got all the credit, all the recognition, your name on the building, your face in the news. I did the real work while you played the benevolent billionaire, so yes, when opportunities arose to redirect some funds, I took them, and I would have gotten away with it if your meddling wife hadn't decided to play detective. Where is Dr. Chen? Richard demanded. Marcus gestured, and one of his men dragged a woman forward. Dr. Lisa Chen looked exhausted and frightened but unharmed. She cried out when she saw Sophie. Mama? Now we're all here, Marcus said, except for one person. He pulled out his phone and played a video. The screen showed a bound woman in a dark room, but Richard would recognize Eleanor anywhere. My insurance policy, she's been quite useful, actually. All these months I had a little spy working in my organization, feeding information to the authorities. Took me a while to figure out it was her. Eleanor always was clever about covering her tracks. Richard's blood ran cold. Marcus knew. Eleanor's cover was blown. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus continued. You're going to sign documents transferring full ownership of Thornton Industries to me. Then you're going to drink this. He held up a small vial of clear liquid. It's a simple sedative that will make you quite ill. By the time anyone finds you, you'll be incoherent. I'll tell the authorities you had a breakdown. that the grief finally broke you. Dr. Chen and the girl will disappear, and Eleanor, well, she'll finally stay gone like she should have 3 years ago. You're insane if you think I'll cooperate with this. The alternative is watching me hurt this child. Marcus moved towards Sophie, who tried to shrink away. Stop! The shout came from the warehouse entrance. A woman strode in, gun in hand, and Richard's heart soared even as his fear spiked. Eleanor looked thinner and older than he remembered, but her eyes burned with the same fierce determination that had made him fall in love with her. Eleanor, what are you doing? Marcus reached for his own weapon. I told you to stay with the backup location. I'm ending this, Marcus. Eleanor's gun never wavered. Richard, get Sophie and Lisa, now. Everything happened at once. Richard lunged for Sophie's chair as Eleanor fired a warning shot over Marcus's head. His men moved forward, but suddenly federal agents poured in from every entrance, Agent Morrison's voice booming commands. In the chaos, Richard cut Sophie's bonds and pulled both her and Dr. Chen toward the exit. Shots rang out, not aimed to hurt, but to intimidate and confuse. Richard shielded Sophie with his body as they scrambled for cover behind old crates. He could see Eleanor and Marcus in a standoff, both armed, both shouting accusations. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He dropped his gun and lunged at Eleanor instead, trying to use her as a human shield. They struggled, and Richard felt a surge of protective rage. He'd spent 3 years mourning his wife, and he wasn't going to lose her again. Richard charged forward, tackling Marcus away from Eleanor. They crashed to the concrete floor, and Richard felt something crack in his ribs, but he didn't care. Federal agents swarmed them, pulling Marcus up and securing his hands behind his back. It's over, Agent Morrison announced. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges. As Marcus was led away, still shouting threats and protests, Richard finally allowed himself to look at Eleanor. She stood a few feet away, her gun lowered, tears streaming down her face. Hi, she whispered. Richard crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She felt real and solid and alive. Hi yourself. They held each other as federal agents secured the scene, as Sophie and Dr. Chen reunited with tears and embraces, as the truth finally emerged into the light after years hidden in darkness. Later, much later, after statements were given and charges filed, Richard sat with Eleanor in a secure location, while they waited for the legal proceedings to unfold. Sophie slept on a couch nearby, finally safe with her mother sitting beside her. I need to tell you something, Eleanor said quietly. The day before I supposedly had that accident, someone tampered with my car. I discovered it just in time and avoided the trap. But I knew then that I was in real danger. I contacted Lisa through an old source, someone who knew about her underground clinic. She helped me disappear. Why didn't you contact me? Because Marcus was watching you. Every call, every email, every movement. If I'd reached out, he would have known I survived, and he would have used you to get to me. The hardest thing I've ever done was letting you believe I was gone. Eleanor took his hand. But while I was hidden, I realized something. Marcus wasn't just stealing from our company. The corruption went so much deeper. Government officials, construction firms, healthcare contractors, millions of dollars meant for schools and hospitals and infrastructure, all disappearing into secret accounts. I couldn't just come back and expose Marcus without proof of the entire network, so I took a risk. You went undercover. With a new identity, I got hired by one of Marcus's shell companies. I worked my way up, gathered evidence, made connections. It was dangerous and lonely, but I was getting closer. Then, a week ago, someone recognized me. I don't know who, but Marcus started asking questions. I knew time was running out. Richard squeezed her hand. It's over now. We have enough evidence to dismantle his entire operation. The legal proceedings took months. Marcus Webb and 17 other individuals were eventually convicted on multiple charges. The scandal rocked Portland's business community and led to reforms in government contracting oversight. Thornton Industries underwent a complete restructuring, with Richard personally overseeing the removal of any corrupt elements. Through it all, Eleanor testified with courage and precision. Dr. Lisa Chen was recognized for her humanitarian work, even if much of it had existed in legal grey areas. And Sophie, resilient young Sophie, became something of a symbol for the innocent people who'd been caught up in the corruption. When the dust finally settled, Richard made a decision. He stepped down from his position at Thornton Industries and created a foundation in honor of Lisa Chen and her work. The Chen Foundation would provide safe medical care for people who fell through the cracks of the traditional healthcare system, people running from dangerous situations, people who needed help but had nowhere to turn. Eleanor took a position as the Foundation's Director of Investigations, using her skills to root out corruption and advocate for the vulnerable. Sophie, with Lisa's blessing, spent much of her time at the Thornton house, where Richard and Eleanor delighted in giving her the childhood that had been disrupted by her mother's dangerous work. One Saturday morning, exactly 3 years after the day Sophie first appeared at Evergreen Cemetery, Richard stood before his wife's fake grave. Beside him stood Eleanor, very much alive, and Sophie, holding both their hands. "Should we have them remove it?" Richard asked, looking at the marble headstone. Eleanor shook her head. "Let it stay. A reminder that sometimes the darkest lies can lead us to the most important truths, that the end of one story is really just the beginning of another." Sophie looked up at them with her wise, knowing eyes. "And that sometimes the answers we need come from the most unexpected places." Richard smiled and pulled them both close. He'd spent 2 years mourning at an empty grave, lost in grief and manipulation. Now he stood in the same spot, filled with gratitude, surrounded by the people he loved, knowing that the truth always finds its way to the surface, even when it takes a 7-year-old girl with a toy shovel to dig it up.